Hi, it's Alysa here. Today we're going to talk about loneliness. And this is a topic that might bring up feelings of self doubt, past or current pains, feelings of sadness, and other negative effects. So keep in mind, we all deserve to be happy, healthy, and safe. So if you need some sort of assistance, be sure to reach out. Could be a friend, your therapist, or other medical help. Or you can call one of these free hotlines, including the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration at 1 800 663 HELP or the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 1 800 273 8255. And feel free to listen to this episode however you want, in chunks, all at one time, or not at all, because the most important thing is to take care of you. You're listening to Best Forevers, a podcast for kindred spirits, a podcast that encourages you to love more on your friends and to further consider the issues that plague friendships. I'm Alysa Lucas, and in 2011, I thought the Kelly Clarkson song Stronger was a bop. And you know what? It actually still is. But my favorite part of the song is a lyric that helps us address something that we all experience. She sings, and I do not, so I will quote it. She sings, quote, doesn't mean I'm lonely when I'm alone, end quote. And so Miss Kelly Clarkson gets at the idea that we misunderstand the universal experience of loneliness. And in fact, according to Kendra Cherry for Very Well Mind, indicates that loneliness is not necessarily about being alone. We can be by ourselves and enjoy the solitude, just like the to be by yourself. Or we can be by ourselves and completely crave connection with another person. Or we can be surrounded by all sorts of friends and feel super connected to everyone in the room. Or we can be surrounded by all sorts of friends and feel completely empty inside. In fact, there's something called the Marilyn Monroe syndrome. You might have heard of it. This is where one can feel lonely despite having large social networks, or in her case, having a number of people who love you but never want to get to know you for the real you. So, in honor of Cheer Up a Lonely Person Day for July 11th, I'm starting a series of episodes that focus on loneliness to help deepen our understanding of the loneliness epidemic and how we can manage our own loneliness and acknowledge and address other people's loneliness, i.e., cheer up a lonely person, right? So, in this episode, the first installment, we will discuss what loneliness is and why we might experience loneliness, as well as why we should be concerned with it as an epidemic. And so, because it is a heavy topic, and can be, for some people, you just want to learn more. For others, it can bring up lots of feelings. I'm not going to have the series in a row, right? It's not going to be like 1, 2, 3, 4, and they're all right there. They're going to be about every other week or every third week, just so that we can have some other conversations and celebrations and discussions in between this topic that is so important. But like, let's also take care of ourselves while we do it. So before we get started today, though, I wanted to give a shout out to my former graduate student, teaching assistant, and previous guest, Lauren, for her research on this topic for this podcast and the other installments in the series. Additionally, I'm very excited to welcome Amethyst, my new digital marketing director, to all of the podcasts. She is working on Best Forevers, Fatalities, and the upcoming Unrequited. And having worked together for a short amount of time, I can tell you that she's already whipped me into shape, and I'm already excited about learning from her and having these practical tools that she's putting into play to get the word out there about friendship and all these important things. So I'm excited about Amethyst. She has great knowledge and experience. She has wonderful enthusiasm and already, as I was saying, inspiration. She presented me with Cheer Up a Lonely Person Day, and it renewed my interest in detailing this topic, as loneliness impacts us all. And it is certainly tied to friendship, as we will talk about over the series. So thank you to Amethyst, and of course thank you to Miss Kelly Clarkson for bringing attention to the topic of loneliness, because we need that attention, as loneliness is much different than appreciating solitude. If you want to hear more about alone time, check out episode 112, Alone Time and Friendship, of this podcast, and so you can hear all about having your own time and how you can communicate that to friends and how it might differ from some other scenarios, being left out and being isolated. But according to the 2004 academic research by Henson, Divig, Pawelko, and Canary, Quote, it is possible to be alone yet not feel lonely, or in contrast, to have those large social networks and a lot of social contact, yet still experience feelings of loneliness, end quote. They continue to describe loneliness as a universal experience with an affective component likely to have an effect on our relationships. In the article, they cite Peplow and Perlman from 1982, indicating that, quote, loneliness is often depicted, or more specifically, as the subjective experience that one's actual relationships are less satisfactory in meeting one's desired relational expectations. So, what does that mean? It means that when we have a discrepancy between what we expect from our relationships and what we're actually experiencing for our social connections, we're going to experience negative feelings and loneliness. And that is according to Crystal Rapo for Healthline in 2019. These negative feelings are further detailed by Kendra Cherry as feeling empty, alone, and unwanted. Quote, people who are lonely often crave human contact, but their state of mind makes it more difficult to form connections with other people, end quote. If we look at someone surrounded by people and cannot understand why they might be alone, it's because it's that person's perception of that discrepancy. So you could look at someone and be like, wow, they seem to be so supported. They have family and friends and, a partner and coworkers, and why can't I have all that? And they might have all of those things physically, but their feelings for those relationships might be different. So it is very subjective. And so we have to keep in mind that someone's perception of relationship is important to understanding their loneliness. Okay. And that same article by Kendra Cherry, it's noted that loneliness is, quote, defined by researchers as feeling lonely more than once a week. So some people experience chronic loneliness, where the feelings of loneliness may extend over time and cut through many different contexts, while others may experience situational loneliness. This might be the difference between feeling lonely in a very consistent fashion across a consistent amount of time versus having pangs of loneliness in certain situations. For example, you might feel connected to others, but if you're single and you don't want to be single, you're likely to experience more loneliness when hanging around couples. So that would be an example of situational loneliness. If you're feeling lonely at work, at home, in your romantic relationship, or you want a relationship and you don't have one, you feel lonely or those feelings of emptiness with your friendships, there's some discrepancy with family relationships, that's going to be more of a chronic experience of loneliness. And I can say that, been there, done that for both of these, right? Where you can have loneliness over a certain amount of time and then certain situations, right? So the revised UCLA loneliness scale may be one way someone can self-report such feelings, right? We can assess how we might feel. The scale was revised in 1980 by Russell, Peplow, and Catrona and can be located online via Google, as well as there's a link directly to the document the PDF that I used in show notes. The survey has 20 questions and includes such items as I lack companionship, there's no one I can turn to, I am no longer close to anyone, my interests and ideas are not shared by those around me, I feel left out, I feel isolated from others, and people are around me but not with me. So those are just some of the examples of questions that are worded in a way that would indicate that someone is lonely. There are other questions that would indicate, if you scored high on it, that you didn't experience loneliness. So it's all part of this survey. So folks may assess their feelings of loneliness, and this survey has been used in academic research, but it's important to note if you're feeling lonely and need assistance to seek out help from a therapist or call one of the hotlines that I've already mentioned, which I'll mention again here. The Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, that number is 1-800-662-HELP. And the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline is 1-800-273-8255. The survey, though, it's important noting that it's the person who perceives their own feelings of loneliness. So I'm taking the survey and I'm going, I lack companionship. What sort of score am I going to give myself for that, right? So it isn't someone else's observation or someone's interactions with me. It is my own feelings. So, in a recent Psychology Today article by David J. Lee, loneliness is described as a two-part problem. The first part of the problem is that, quote, loneliness is the result of perceived unimportance. We need to feel like we matter to one another, right? And a number of factors can impact those perceptions of feelings, including shame, guilt, trauma, abuse, neglect, and so much more. So, again, the first part of the problem, according to David Lee, is that it's that we perceive ourselves as unimportant to other people, right? We perceive ourselves of having that disconnect between what we want and what we're getting, right? So Lee also notes that the second part of the problem is, quote, a result of lack of self-understanding, specifically understanding our unique needs for connection, and that we may process differently because of such things as personality, culture, context, mental health issues, and more. And I think that's important to note as part of perception as well, is that if we're not self-aware, so right, we perceive our feelings of loneliness, right? We perceive that we are seen by someone else as unimportant, and that may make us feel lonely, right? But we also have to consider that we might not be self aware, or that we might not understand ourselves to know that our personality might have an impact, right? So that this episode, the purpose could be to understand loneliness in general. It might be to understand even just walking away knowing that loneliness is subjective perception that we all experience at some point in our life. But it also could be like this might be a time to self-understand how you process a disconnect between what you want in social connections and what you're getting in social connections, right? So that's pretty important. And Kendra Cherry continues to say that we should consider our differences because our loneliness may differ, like with this example. Quote, a lonely child who struggles to make friends at school has different needs than a lonely adult whose spouse has recently died, right? So those are different scenarios, and there's so many other scenarios in which loneliness may result. So it is important to understand differences and how we might process those things, and how, for example, skill might be important to the child. Maybe they haven't developed the ability to make connections with other people. And then we might have to consider with the person who lost their partner, grief, right? So there are things that can impact these different experiences of loneliness. And so, perhaps understanding this problem is to understand the two parts, right? To know about the perceived unimportance and then the self-understanding. According to the New Yorker by Jill Lepore, quote, we hunger for intimacy, we wither without it, end quote. As humans, we have basic needs to be met, like the need for inclusion and the need for affection. So it is critical to note the various causes for why such needs may not be met. The Healthline article outlines a series of such causes, including, and this is going to be a list with some commentary from the article, and then the commentary might be mine. Okay. So when you change schools or jobs, right, think about you might have felt comfortable at your job, but you have a new opportunity or a new challenge, and you go and you don't know anyone, and there isn't any way to connect, or the connections at the beginning of the workplace might be really superficial, so you might feel like you don't have anyone that gets you or understands you, right? You work from home. Hello, quarantine, right? Like, so that might be an experience for those who have been remote workers for some time and may have had to do some extra legwork to be sure that their social connections are met, and hasn't then been a challenge for the majority of us who might be at home. P.S. shout out to nurses, doctors, all those who work in hospitals, and all the essential workers out there making things happen for all of us, and all the people who are trying to help us be safe and healthy. So, but certainly, when I was shoved into remote learning in March, like a lot of people in remote learning, remote teaching, all of the above, that it becomes, okay, so I'm working at home, and then where is the boundary between what is work and what's my home life? And I don't have the interaction of coworkers, unless you count my cats and dog, who don't really respond back. So brainstorming is a pain in the butt. It's like we don't have those things. So that certainly can be a cause for loneliness and may have increased during quarantine. When people move to a new city, that might cause loneliness. You don't have the people you used to hang out with. You don't have the spots you used to go to. I remember having this feeling first when I moved out of Michigan. So I lived in Michigan my entire life until I went to graduate school at Penn State. And my parents helped me move out there. Thank you, parents. I think after they helped me move to New York after Penn State, they were like, that's it, kid. No, they helped me move to New York. It was after I moved back to Michigan. They were like, you're on your own. We're not doing any more moving. They've done their share of Alysa moves. So, bless their hearts. But the idea is I remember going to the grocery store with my mom. And first off, I couldn't find the brand of whatever dressing I have and wanting to cry in the aisle because the change is overwhelming. This transition, this new time, it's not just moving to a new city. Like when you move to a new city, that includes changing and transitions through everything. And something as simple as having my damn dressing or whatever brand of this or that I usually have provides some level of comfort, right? So I remember that, but then also later at the grocery store, after my parents left, I remember going back to the same grocery store and walking up and down the aisles, just looking, and I was like, I do not understand what is going on. I could not find alcohol. And here's the thing, I'm not a big drinker. I was over the age of 21, so I was being a responsible drinker, but, I was just looking for probably cider, because at that time, that's probably all I drank. And I could not find it, and I left going, Pennsylvania doesn't sell alcohol. And so I was like, this is it. Like, graduate school's not going to work. I'm not going to make any friends. I mean, obviously, anxiety was playing a part here. And maybe my perfectionism, as we talked about in a previous episode. But I just remember being like, I can't do it. I don't have the things that make me feel comfortable or remind me of home. Well, it turns out, those of you who are from Pennsylvania listening right now, you're probably like, we have alcohol. It's just not in the grocery store like in Michigan. They have bottle shops and they have wine and spirit stores, which I learned quickly after the 20 minutes going up and down the aisles at that grocery store, right? So that's an example, right? You just miss those sorts of things. And then when my parents helped me move to New York, it was right after my appendix burst, and they had left, and I had basically been in a hospital bed or on the couch for over a month. So you can imagine, like, just doing small things was hard, and I have asthma, so it's like I already struggle, and I was just like struggle busing it, and I was like, okay, I'm starting to feel better. My mom and dad have left, after my mom cared for me for this long period of time. And I was like, all right, I'm going to unpack my office. So I start unpacking stuff and I break down boxes and I'm like taking the boxes out to the recycling. And after like the second or third trip, I bent over and I hurt my back and I couldn't move. And what was really annoying was that I had put my lunch in the microwave, warming up some leftovers or something that my mom had made. And I put that in the microwave and I went out to do the boxes and I came back in to do another load. And that's when I hurt my back. And it was one of those microwaves that when it's done, it will beep like every 15 to 30 seconds until you open the door. Super annoying. And you're like, oh, that's just a good reminder. Well, not when you hurt your back. And my phone was in the back of the apartment. And I basically took an hour to crawl back to my phone. And then when I got to my phone, I was like, I have no one to call. I don't know anyone here. I don't know anyone. The only person I know was the person in the leasing office, and the leasing office is closed on Sunday, and it's Sunday. So those are the sorts of things, like, we all have these sorts of experiences, but this might be more likely when loneliness might occur, right? So let's talk about some more examples. The end of a relationship, so a breakup or divorce. Talk about being enmeshed with another person and then it not working out for whatever reason, and then having spent all your time with that person and then they're not there anymore. It reminds me of a Sex and the City episode where Carrie is talking to a friend about a breakup, and he's like, we used to walk and we go to flea markets and we get cheese on Sunday. I'm like, I might be screwing it up, but basically the idea was like, they didn't know how to live their life because that person wasn't there anymore. So as people start to grasp with the idea of the breakup and what it all means and dealing with all sorts of feelings and anger and denials and just feelings of or relief or whatever the case is, that even someone who broke up with someone could miss and feel lonely because they're not in a relationship or they're not with that person anymore. And as they start to deal with it, those feelings of loneliness might start to go away, right? Or they might start to diminish in some way. And besides ending a relationship, another article, Very Well Mind, also adds that this can happen after the death of a loved one. And I would obviously, people, number one, parents, partners, kids, siblings, grandparents, whoever might have passed, but I would also put here our pets, because our pets are family to a lot of us. I call my pets my best friends. I spend the most amount of time with them. So I know that, these are the first 3 pets that I've had on my own. And I know that when the day comes, and I'm going to knock on some wood, when that day comes, let's hope it's not anytime soon, that it's going to feel a little lonely without the whole pack, the whole Lucas pack together, right? So definitely thinking of the death of a loved one, including our cats, dogs, and whoever we snuggle with in our homes, right? Some other people who might experience loneliness is living alone for the first time. So maybe I want to say the first time I lived alone was also when I lived in New York and I didn't know anyone. So all of that was happening at once. And within 9 months is when I got Rooney, my first cat, and now it's been 10 years, right? So I got a cat because cats, it's nice to have a furry living creature who is excited to see you when you get home. It makes a world of difference. I can say my feelings, the negative feelings that I had about living in this new place, not feeling well after my surgery, which extended for some time, and just not knowing many people, that having Rooney helped majorly, right? Some people might have trouble getting to know other people or having difficulty building connections with others. And so we do have to consider a number of things here: self-doubt, low self-esteem, social anxiety, and even skill level, right? As I mentioned with the lonely child. And it's not just children who might not have developed those skills yet. There might be adults without those skills, or people who are not comfortable doing those things and have maybe stunted the growth of skill or the development of skill, right? And then finally, a cause could be a number of casual relationships. So we making a lot of shallow relationships can make people feel lonely because none of those relationships seem very meaningful. So if you're making a lot of connections online, you have these connections, and that is helpful and can be fun, and those connections with people might deepen, but it also might just be something it's not feeling close to any one person. And so enliveabout.com from 2019 states, quote, "True loneliness lingers, and while it can affect people differently, there are some common signs, including having a negative attitude toward relationships in general." So not being very happy with the fact that other people have partners or other people have friends and you don't. That could be developing some feelings of resentment. There can be feeling sad about not having friends, feeling like you aren't part of a crowd or a group, you don't have your posse or squad or whatever people might call it, and feeling that you're just not accepted in the world because you haven't been able to find that group or to feel like you're connected in some way, or feeling close to other people. And that you might also feel as if you're too different to have friends, right? So that your interests or your beliefs are so different, it might be hard to connect with other people. And so even further, though, we do have to note that loneliness also can manifest itself physically. And so Healthline notes those signs, those physical signs that we might be able to sort of assess in terms of loneliness. And that can be decreased energy, feeling foggy or unable to focus, insomnia, interrupted sleep or other sleep issues, decreased appetite, feelings of self-doubt, hopelessness, and worthlessness, a tendency to get sick frequently, body aches and pains, feelings of anxiousness or restlessness, increased shopping, substance abuse, increased desire to binge watch TV shows or movies, and cravings for physical warmth, like warm clothes or maybe warm tea or hot chocolate or blankets and things like that. And so, even more though, considering that there might be these feelings or these physical manifestations of loneliness, we might be doing things, according to that liveabout.com article, that might mask loneliness, right? So, we're not lonely if we're busy at work, right? So, we certainly don't have to think about friends if we're just too busy for them, right? Or I'm busy exercising and you do it often, or you do it whenever you have free downtime, and so throwing yourself into that, signing up for a lack of activities but never finding really anyone to connect with in those activities, or spending too much time on the computer and what they say as hiding behind social media. And I think that we all might use social media as a way to cope, as a way to escape, especially during quarantine, when there's just a lot going on. And, as I discuss the physical signs of loneliness, you're like, that sounds like anxiety or depression or quarantine or, those sorts of things. So, it's not necessarily something that might be diagnosable in the sense of like, you are diagnosed with anxiety, but these are some things that you might be able to talk about and talk out with other people to start to determine if these are in fact feelings of loneliness and how you might be able to decrease those feelings or maybe help another person who is feeling lonely, or just managing when we do feel lonely. Because here's the thing, we might not want to feel lonely, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, but the thing about it is we're going to feel lonely at some time or another, so it might help to be prepared for those feelings. So, while a life hack article by Anna Chewy notes that being, quote, hypersocial or making new friends to fill the void may also lead to empty connections. Quote, a person can have thousands of friends on Facebook, but only truly know 50 of them. The high number doesn't mean loneliness is an impossibility. Sure, it can feel good to connect with a lot of people, but new connections don't always lead to strong relationships. The more shallow relationships you build, the more lonely you feel. It's a vicious cycle. You feel lonely, you try to meet more people, you connect with even more unsuitable people, and those people leaving you more lonely. It's why wise people often say they would rather have 2 really close friends than 20 acquaintances, end quote. So that's one of the things that, besides masking, as the live.com article talked about, that in this life hack article, we're talking about this might be what people do, right? Like saying, well, I have lots of friends, so then that's a way to deal with it. But if they're not strong connections, then you could end up feeling even more lonely. So we have to talk about loneliness as an epidemic. So let's get into this. I love this article by Holly Leibowitz Rossi in 2018. She talks about a wellness acronym called HALT, HALT. Quote, the idea that if you want to be calm and content, never let yourself get too hungry, angry, lonely, or tired, end quote. And I just like that. I feel like, yes, like all those things make it very difficult to be happy or to do the things that you need to do. So we got to work on all of them. But focusing on the L in HALT is important because, according to an American Psychological Association report, quote, chronic loneliness might be a greater public health hazard than obesity, end quote. So here's the thing. Loneliness means our expectations for social connections is not being met. And that can be hell for us mentally, emotionally, physically, and more. Simply put, by the New Yorker, loneliness is terrible for your health. Okay, and that's the direct quote, but our health, right? Described in the same article as, quote, a state of profound distress, they, among other articles I read, loneliness has been named as a serious public health concern by the former U.S. Surgeon General. In fact, Psychology Today indicates that, quote, in the last 50 years, rates of loneliness have doubled in the United States. In a survey of over 20,000 American adults, it was found that almost half of respondents reported feeling lonely, left out, and isolated. Further, 1 in 4 Americans shared that they rarely feel understood, and 1 in 5 people believe they rarely or never feel close to people, end quote. And this isn't a surprise when considering that the Leibowitz Rossi article states that some people are literally alone most of the time. Data compiled by United Kingdom found that 200,000 people over age 75 had not had a conversation with a friend or a relative in more than a month. More than a month! That's awful, right? Think about connecting with people, the needs that we have, and that people over a certain age haven't had any conversations with people who are significant in their life. What can that do to the state of mind, to their perceived unimportance or importance, right? Those feelings of loneliness. And that was a direct quote from that article. And a Cigna report notes that Generation Z, those age 18 to 29, are the generations that feel the most feelings of loneliness, with an indication that their health is worse off than older generations. Like, wow, we're talking about 18-year-olds who are going into college or into jobs in a worse situation than any of the generations that precede them. So this is definitely something to be concerned about. And so the 2018 Cigna study provides more evidence of loneliness as an epidemic, including, and these are all direct quotes, nearly half of Americans report sometimes or always feeling alone or left out. 1 in 4 Americans rarely or never feel as though there are people who really understand them. 2 in 5 Americans sometimes or always feel that their relationships are not meaningful and that they are isolated from others. 1 in 5 people report they rarely or never feel close to people or feel like there are people they can talk to. Americans who live with others are less likely to be lonely compared to those who live alone. However, this does not apply to single parents' guardians. So even though they live with children, they're more likely to be lonely. So that is the one group that lives with other people that will also have high scores of loneliness. Only around half of Americans have meaningful in-person social interactions, such as having an extended conversation with a friend or spending quality time with family on a daily basis. And social media use alone is not a predictor of loneliness. In fact, respondents defined as very heavy users of social media have a loneliness score that is not markedly different from the score of those who never use social media. Okay. So those who use social media, their loneliness score was 43.5, and those who never use social media had a loneliness score of 41.7. Right. So there wasn't much difference there. But certainly there's a case of concern here, right? People are experiencing loneliness, and young folks as well as the elderly may be the ones that feel the most lonely. Loneliness produces negative feelings and experiences, including how we might feel about ourselves and our relationships with others. In fact, Henson et al. Suggests that there may be a self-fulfilling prophecy related to loneliness. Specifically, we may feel left out, and then we retreat, which then makes us feel even more lonely. So we end up being part of this vicious cycle that never allows us to get out of it. And they found in their studies that folks who are lonely are less likely to use relational maintenance strategies. And these are strategies that we need to ensure the status quo of our relationships, that we can keep them the way we want them to maintain these relationships, to keep them going over time, which means folks may experience even more loneliness because they might feel like they're not as connected to their partner because they're not participating in maintenance strategies that they might usually participate in if they didn't feel lonely. So it's just loneliness adds to the loneliness. And we have to consider that some folks just have a greater difficulty making and maintaining connections, perhaps due to factors like anxiety, social anxiety. But also, as a communication person, I have to say communication competence. Do we have the skills to create the connections we hope for? And do we have the ability to address the issues when we perceive a disconnect or discrepancy? And are we teaching children these skills that will carry through until their adulthood? And are we helping those that might have a higher need for assistance? So there might be people who are experiencing or living with something else that might make it more difficult to make connections. And what are we doing to ensure that people are having the most basic human thing that we all need? And that's connection, right? We need that interaction. We need that connection. It obviously has a negative impact on our health. And so what are we doing about it? What do we do about it before kids go to school? What happens at the different levels of school? Are we doing things for people in the workplace? Are we doing things for people in college? You know, what are we doing, right? I guess that's the major goal. What are we doing, right? The article in the New Yorker addresses the history of loneliness, including the view of German analyst Frieda Fromm-Reichmann. And she's quoted in the article as saying, quote, "Loneliness seems to be such a painful, frightening experience that people will do practically everything to avoid it. The longing for interpersonal intimacy stays with every human being from infancy through life, and there's no human being who is not threatened by its loss. It produces the sad conviction that nobody else has experienced or ever will sense what they are experienced or have experienced," end quote. So the feeling of that threat of loss of relationships makes us feel lonely and not understood by people because we don't think anyone else has had that experience of loneliness. So we have to address that this is something we all experience. It is a human experience. It's a universal experience. There might be some differences, but there's going to be some point in our life where we're going to experience it, whether it's chronic, situational, or both. So it is not just an experience for the elderly or the young, the poor, or the outcast, as may have been believed in the past. And we spend so much time on social media, which may mean we participate in things like social comparison that might lead to more feelings or enhanced feelings of loneliness. And given that many of us are home without anyone else, like myself right now, and with less chance to connect with others, COVID-19 is absolutely exacerbating loneliness in our society. The more attention we put on loneliness, the more likely we may be able to help those around us and help ourselves. And friendships may be the key here. Friendships may help. In the Very Well Mind article by Kendra Cherry, quote, "Having just 3 or 4 close friends is enough to ward off loneliness and reduce the negative health consequences associated with the state of mind," end quote. So not only do I think that's evidence to consider that people who might not have these friends, considering loneliness to be an epidemic, and that friendships might also help us combat loneliness, is also making the point of this entire podcast and why it exists, right? That friendship matters, right? That we often push it aside and neglect it. But with that many people, that all of us at some point or another are experiencing loneliness, we have to consider that friendships are important and what can we do to elevate them, to help people make friendships, to help people work through issues in friendships, to maintain them, because those things are going to help reduce feelings of loneliness. But friends, I'm not so quick to take a victory lap, right? I'm like, woo, I just made the point of the entire podcast. Friendships matter. Here's the thing. Friendships may also impact our feelings of loneliness by making us perhaps feeling left out or not having enough friends or feeling like our friendships aren't close enough, right? So we do have to consider that when there is light, there is also dark, right? This has been a deep dive into what loneliness is, how to assess it, what the causes and why we should do something about it. This particular installment of the series of loneliness episodes. The topic may make us feel sad or remind us of past, current, or even future concerns of loneliness for ourselves, but it's important to remember to reach out to someone else if we need help. And in fact, if you do have a friend you feel close to, even talking to them or touching base with them might help decrease those feelings of loneliness, because friendship matters, but also sometimes it can exacerbate loneliness. Okay, so we have both sides of it. So in this episode, right, we might have been thinking about ourselves, right? We're thinking about ourselves, but in some cases, we've thought about other people, and let's do that here, right? Let's consider this information as acknowledging that loneliness exists and acknowledging the loneliness of other people in the world around us. Our coworkers, our neighbors, our friends, complete strangers. So what can we do for those around us? Because perhaps trying to cheer up other people or making other people feel less lonely can also make us feel less lonely. So Cheer Up a Lonely Person Day in this episode may be a good time, knowing the impact of loneliness on our health, that there might be small ways in which each of us can make other people smile, to make them feel more connected, to make them feel understood, and to make them feel less alone. And so I'm going to give you one idea here. There's so many ideas, right? And we're going to talk about them more. But this is the first installment. And because it is Cheer Up a Lonely Person Day, on July 11th, here is a great idea to cheer up other people. Okay, I love this. I shared it on Facebook, and I absolutely adore it, and I have a couple different pen pals this summer, and so I'm adding to my pen pal situation with this. So on June 26th of this year, Victorian Senior Care posted images of some of their residents, including signs with their name and things that they're into, and asking for pen pals. So one way to make someone smile may be receiving that snail mail, and you can find those residents at the Victorian Senior Care Center on their Facebook page. So you can search Victorian Senior Care, and you can write to one of the residents. They have an address right on there. So as we continue with the Understanding Loneliness series, we'll talk about more ways to prevent or how to cope with it, or how we can cheer up other people or acknowledge that other people are experiencing loneliness. It's going to have a major impact on their human need for other people. This is a great place to start. Something small, easy, send a postcard. And you don't have to do the Victoria Senior Care Center. You might pick a center in your area, or maybe even thinking about family member, right? Start there. Maybe a little cousin that's probably missing camp because of COVID-19. Send them something, right? A friend you haven't talked to in a while. There's always a small place to start, and it be the price of a stamp, a card that you probably already have, and the time it'll take you to write it out. And I can wager a guess that you could probably write maybe 5 notes during an episode of something you're watching on Netflix. And in fact, some of those people at the Victorian Senior Care will tell you that they're into TV, or they're into animals, or they're into baseball. And you can find the person that you might connect with, and you can say, I'm into that too. And that's going to probably make them smile and make them feel less lonely in this world. Like I said, it's a great place to start. So as we continue this series, I want you to think about, the 2-part problem of the perceived unimportance and the self-understanding, and thinking about some of the times in which maybe you experience loneliness, or times that might be in the future that you might imagine where you might feel loneliness. That can be a good place to sort of reflect and assess, and if you need help, to reach out. And then also know that this isn't where we're going to stop, and we're going to talk about a lot more things related to loneliness in the upcoming episodes for this series. So if you have stories about times of loneliness, questions you'd like me to answer about loneliness, or ways you've battled those lonely feelings, please feel free to email me at bestforeverspod@gmail.com if you feel comfortable doing so. Or if you like to go anonymous, you can check out the link to the survey and show notes, or on social media, and I'm at Best Forever's Pod on all the platforms. So basically, it's a Google form, and you just go there, and you can tell me what you want to be called on the podcast, so you can name your pseudonym so you can remain anonymous, and then you can just post a question or share a story. It's just a space for you to write, and it's not connected to your name or your email. So if you'd like to be a part of it, you like to engage, you like to learn more about it, or share your experiences or ask questions, be sure to do that. And so until next time, friends, consider cheering up someone who may be feeling lonely, because without social connections, who would we be? Thanks for listening to Best Forevers. If you like what you hear, be sure to subscribe, rate, review, and of course, share with a friend. Please be sure to follow Best Forevers on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Best Forevers Pod, and I'm at Dr. Alysa Lucas on Twitter. You can always find the podcast webpage for more information at bestforeverspod.com, and share your stories of friendship by emailing me at bestforeverspod@gmail.com. And if you'd like to support the movement to love on our friends more, check out the podcast on patreon.com/bestforeverspod. Now, friends, check out this recommended podcast that you must get in your ear holes immediately.
Hey everyone, I'm Kelly.
And I'm Emily, and we're from Whining About Herstory.
Ever notice how women seem to be missed, forgotten, or maybe even purposely left out of history books?
We did, so we decided to take the his out of history and make it herstory.
Each episode, we discuss the lives and general awesomeness of these historical Wonder Women, all while having a glass of wine.
Or maybe a bottle. Come join us on all of your favorite podcast platforms at WAH Pod on Instagram, WAH_pod on Twitter, and at whiningaboutherstory.com. Remember, that's no H or E in whining.
See you soon. Cheers!